Good evening and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. Tonight, changing the way India works, or more importantly, changing the way Indian workers are treated, the relations between employee and employer. That's our focus on the show this evening, specifically because of recent amendments made to some labour laws by the centre, Rajasthan going significantly further in what they call essential labour reform. Joining me to discuss this with various perspectives tonight, Mr. R.C. Bhargav, Chairman of Maruti Suzuki India, Professor Dipankar Gupta. He headed the CPACT Working Group on Labour Reforms. They've just come out with their recommendations. Also with me, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, Chairperson of Biocon, also part of the Rajasthan Advisory Council for Chief Minister Vasundhara Raje Scindia. I'm also joined by B.N. Rai, President of India's largest group of trade unions, the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, and William Bissell, Head of Fab India, also the author of Making India Work. Thank you all very much for joining me this evening. Mr. Bhargav, as somebody who's dealt with workers for years, you've really been, in a sense, a brain trust on how worker relations have been in India. When Japanese practice was first brought in, it was an area of great interest. Over the years, however, that's changed. And of course, we saw the tragic incidents of 1 year ago in industrial disputes in Maruti. Looking at where things stand today, both in Maruti, both in car manufacturing and in industry today across India, what do you think is the most urgent reform or perspective that needs to be changed when we look at labour in India?
See, actually, it's not correct that we have changed our labour practices at all. They're exactly what they used to be and how they've developed over the last 30-odd years. That Manesar incident was an aberration caused by certain extraneous factors, which we don't have to go into here, but that has not affected the fundamental thing. The philosophy which I believe in labour reform, 2 or 3 things important. If you're going to be a competitive manufacturing unit, you cannot do it without the voluntary and active involvement of labour in making improvements in the factory in terms of quality, in terms of productivity, in terms of cost reduction. The workers have to get involved in it because experience of Japan and other places show that it's the workers who can make the incremental improvements all the time, which ultimately are much more valuable than any major breakthrough in manufacturing technology, which doesn't happen. And therefore, the practices in labour and the labour laws should permit this to happen. It means workers must be motivated. If you have contract workers who don't know their future, they don't know how long they'll be there, they cannot be motivated. You have to have a management which recognizes the importance of the workers for the growth and continuity of improvements in the factory and therefore making it more competitive. And therefore management practices have to be such as will get workers motivated to think that their careers, their prospects, their future lies with the company, not with the confrontational situations, but with actual improvements in the company, because the earnings for the workers can only come out of company earnings. There's no other source of earning. So workers and management have to work as a team, and I think labour laws should be essentially designed for that. Today they are not.
Professor Gupta, if you can come in here, because there's been some movement towards a reform. This was a major part of the BJP's election campaign. The Prime Minister described himself at one stage as Mazdoor #1, and we've seen him now call for Make in India. For that to happen, your group has actually proposed something quite drastic. Do you see that as possible at a time when I think we've got the number of different laws that govern labour in India, I think, add up to over 160?
I think you're being charitable.
Is it more?
But it's like this, and what Mr. Bhargav said, I mean, that's the general principle with which I'm in complete agreement. In fact, we believe that Trade and Disputes Act, IDA, whatever, they are flawed because they actually belong to another era, kind of a, you might even say, Paleolithic era, where things were adversarial and people dug in their heels and they sat in their trenches and they fired away at each other. But that won't take you very far in today's day and age, especially if you want to live up to the dream of Make in India or come to India and make India a manufacturing giant. It won't work. And as Mr. Bhargav said, and this is exactly the point of view that we have advocated here and put into practice what he's saying. Whatever he said, I agree with completely. In fact, our first page endorses that point of view. We have to talk in terms of citizenship, partnership, and unless you have partnership, you will not make India a thriving and throbbing industrial force. But to do that, there are many things in the existing labor law that come in the way. And because they've been around for so long, it almost looks like it's natural, it's given, and you dare not tamper with it. If at all, you chop and change. For example, if 100 plus is the threshold for the number of workers who are then protected in a particular unit. If a unit has more than 100 workers, there's a great degree of protection for them. You can't fire them, you can't downsize, right size, whatever be the case, without government notice and so forth. So what is the easy way out? Make it 300. But that's like kicking the can down the road, We're not solving the issue. And make it 500, 1,000. The point really is that are you respecting the worker?
Yeah.
And that is very important. 300, 200, 500 does not actually amount to respecting the worker. The adversarial positions still stand. So our suggestion is really cut to the chase, make it simple. And if you make it simple, you can respect the people whom you want to respect on both sides. That is, get rid of thresholds, 100 plus, 200 plus, 300 plus. What happens then is that entrepreneurs are tempted to try and duck under this bar.
So 299 workers instead of 300 or something
exactly.
like that.
There's always a bar of some kind.
They don't look at scaling up, but scaling down instead.
Then 240 days. There's another, terrible thing. So every now and then, the people are calculating 239. Knock on the door, out you go. Now, if this kind of policy will not let you upgrade, will not build human resource strength, skill sets in any organization, because you want to turn them over. And then what do? You talk about contract labor. And most people don't realize, I'm quite surprised how many entrepreneurs don't know that even when you employ contract labor, you are the principal employer. Now, when they employ contract labor, it's just hire and fire, 240 days, no bonus, 30 days less than a month, no bonus either. So what we are saying is, take away all thresholds and let everybody be on the muster, and they're taken off the muster only when something dreadful happens, and may that not ever happen. But if that happens, then there are certain provisions that have to be followed, because you're respecting the worker, like you said about the management. Likewise, you respect the worker, PF, bonus, provident fund, and in the case of downsizing, right-sizing, layoff, whatever, something called severance pay, which is not unique. It is all of Europe, or most parts of Europe, is also in Brazil, a severance pay. Now, what happens then is that when an entrepreneur wants to right-size or do whatever, layoff or whatever, there is a cost to be paid. So you're not going to be idiosyncratic in the way you handle things. So to be a real entrepreneur, you have to be aware of the costs, and because you're aware of the cost, you actually work harder. It's not that you've got a certain sum of money, you put in the bank, get hold of a few friends, a few political buddies, and start an enterprise. It's here what we're asking for is true entrepreneurship, where worker and management must work in tandem, and they must respect each other.
In fact, I want to bring in Mr. B.N. Rai for a different perspective. Mr. Rai, I think, in a sense, what we've discussed so far looks at the fact that labor law in India has actually had the opposite effect. It was meant to safeguard the right of workers, but you've seen yourself that the rise of contract labor has been because people want to avoid these labor laws, that they actually stop people from hiring rather than increasing the number of organized workers in the workforce. Yet, you are opposing any kind of labor reform at the moment. Why are you doing that?
The issue is not labor reform or labor related work. The issue is the only thing that what do you expect from a labor and what a labor desired. He desired 3 guarantees. One, that he should get his wage or salary at a particular time. Second, his job should be guaranteed, wage guarantee, job guarantee. And the third one, the social security guarantee. If these 3 are provided, if service conditions are good, then you can get anything from a worker. People talk about motivation of the worker, but they forget that the entire industry should be as a family. It should be a family, industrial family. If it is a family, then only you can motivate not only worker, but the management and employer too. Employer has a great responsibility, he is asking the management, give me the profit. And management think in any manner I will take the profit. So I will rule upon the labor. I will cut down every facility and benefit, and then I will talk. Therefore, BMS desired that the labor law should be reviewed. The exactly word we given to the all political party before the election, that if all the political party including BJP, that they should review the law.
Why review and not reform? Why is reform a dirty word?
That is what I am going to explain. What is the difference between review and reform? Difference between review and reform is, in the law, labor law is protective law in nature, but there are some lacunas, and punitive measures are so low that anyone can violate any time. 50 rupees fine, 60 rupees fine, 100 rupees fine for violation. They don't care the law. The punitive measures should be made strong. If you made the punitive measures in the labor law strong, then anyone will fear by violating the law. This is one thing. That is what we sensed as a labor law review. It should be reviewed. Other thing, something is that the Inspector Raj, what the employer said, yes, they are creating problem. We said that their power should be reduced. They should be engaged in such work where employers should not get any problem. This is a review, not reform. Reform means you are going to redraft the whole labor law. That is not needed. That is not at all the call of the hour.
The differences perhaps in whether it's benefits between the contract labor and permanent workers, even if they are often doing the same job. Let me bring in Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw on that. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, chairperson of Biocon, but also of course member of the Rajasthan Advisory Council, and Rajasthan has been applauded by some economists for leading the way, setting a Rajasthan model, they said, because they've reviewed 3 key labour laws, the most important one being the law on retrenchment and when government permission is needed. Now, that's something the union BMS has opposed very strongly. Professor Dipankar Gupta has made the point that abolish thresholds altogether from 100 to 300 doesn't make much of a difference. Do you think these reforms are really essential, the way forward to unleash animal spirits, as some put it? Or does it actually have the opposite effect? Why do we never look at reform as how it reforms the worker's life and what he or she is entitled to?
You know, Sonia, the way I look at this is we are actually creating our own problem by calling people labor. When you talk about labor reforms, I think when you talk about equitable and fairness in employees and labor or workers or whatever you call it, I think here I agree with Dipankar that we shouldn't get fixated on the numbers aspect. You know, it's not about increasing the threshold from 100 to 300 or some such number. I think it's really about creating an equitable framework for any employee. For instance, let me give you an example. In our own organization, a lab assistant probably earns a little less than a factory worker, but we tend to classify the factory worker as a labor. Now, I think if you can really make sure that everyone operates under the same system, the same terms of appointment, retrenchment, whatever you call it, then I think you will really bring in true reforms.
Do you think the liberty, as this whole hire and fire, the worry about which unions have about hire and fire, that this will now become rampant across the board? You will find the people, because the problem is that there is no social security net here, whether it's by the employer or by the government, is very weak. And these are aspects that don't seem to be addressed when we look at reform at all. The better working conditions for labour, better living conditions. When we use the word guarantee, it can be a noose for employers in many ways, but the only way for livelihood for workers.
No, I agree. I think workers need to have good social security. I think every organization hiring anybody must provide basic security like healthcare, insurance, like other kinds of security that you will provide to any employee. I think those are very important. You know, the Provident Fund and everything that goes with social security has to be provided. But I think we must also be very, very realistic about what we are talking about when we talk about manufacturing competitiveness. I mean, this morning I was listening to a report at the World Economic Forum on how China is losing its global competitiveness because they have actually simply gone on increasing the minimum wage of workers who are hired under the labor category, and now they find that they are losing out to other countries. So this is also you know, if you ask any company that is very reliant on high intensity labor, then they are also talking about the same kind of situation. So I think you need to look at other aspects of what we are doing, because again China is saying that, you know, this whole labor issue is being dealt with through automation. Now you're going to find a huge displacement of labor if you start automating in a big way, because you don't want to be you know, you don't want to be sort of subjected to all the labor laws which for some reason are looked upon as draconian. Now we need to look at what are the pain points in this labor area. I think I agree with Mr. Bhargava. We need to make sure that we look after our labor very well. I think there are housing issues, there are healthcare issues, there are provident fund and other security issues, and if you can actually make sure that it's a fair system for all, I think we will basically crack this whole labor issue. But if you start only relating to labor reforms as in the kind of areas we are looking at in terms of raising the threshold and, you know, allowing, I mean, it's this hire and fire policy that we are talking about. If somebody is not productive, you know, there must be a mechanism to address that particular person or non-productivity issue. And you know, it's easier said than done saying, oh, you know, you must be a family, you must get everybody involved, you know, but remember, these labor forces are also being, you know, manipulated by union leaders and what have you. How do you crack this whole problem?
I'm going to get Mr. Rai to react to that, because it's interesting that the agreements are usually between you and Mr. Bhargav and Professor Dipankar Gupta, but Mr. Rai, you're the odd one out so far in this discussion. But William Bissell, come in on that, because Fab India in that sense has a very different model of, we use the word labor, or perhaps of workers or craftsmen in your workforce. I think you said you have now about 80,000 plus. How do you deal with issues? Because I think that if you talk to management, it will often be that we are being held hostage by unions. If you talk to unions, they'll say management is being held hostage by a profit. Where do you find a meeting ground?
So it's as Mr. Bhargava touched upon, the adversarial relationship created by labor laws has actually replicated the caste system in India. There are 4 major castes and there are 4 castes in labor. All debate is focused on the Brahminical caste in labor, which is the large organized factory worker who gets PF, ESI, gratuity, bonus, guaranteed this, guaranteed that. The other 3 castes, i.e. the Dalit caste in labor, the OBC caste in labor, and the, say, the business community in labor, which would roughly translate into the floating unorganized worker, is the equivalent of a Dalit. He or she has no rights. The second caste, the OBC equivalent caste, is the unorganized small unit worker. Again, no safety standards, no labor protection, nothing. The third caste is the contract worker. Now there you begin to see some labor laws begin to take effect, especially if you're a contract worker working for some of the large contractual firms where they have 80,000, 100,000 workers, where they follow all the norms. But the smaller contract shops open and shut overnight. I'll give you an example. There are estimated to be around 12 million people engaged in security in India. Now, everybody hears of the group 4s, the big firms, but there are thousands of fly-by-night operators, and we've had to have instances where they've closed and 120 security guards come, hamara PF cut gaya, hamara ESI, nobody's given us. And the person's disappeared, everybody's vanished. What labor? Then they amend the law to say, okay, the principal employer becomes the company. So by doing that, what you do is you create a distortion in the market. Because then the company says, okay, I'm only going to go to the big guys. Because if you go to the little guys tomorrow, they don't pay, they pocket the PF, ESI, we pay it, they don't give it to the worker, then we become the principal employer. So this has been a typical, this labor discussion has been a jugaad discussion. nobody stepped back and said, what is the situation of labor in India? In Delhi, there are over 1 million drivers. 1 million drivers in Delhi. I mean, if their factory has 1,000 people, they have all kinds of, I mean, who's representing their interests? So, to me, it seems to make the debate meaningful, you have to step back. And one of the key things that any government has to do with labor reform is to skill development. Because without skill development, the worker will be coming on a train from his village. He will have a pair of hands. He's uneducated. You're putting him, let's say he goes to work, deliver pizzas. The pizza delivery guys today have computers linked on, Wi-Fi enabled access, they're driving, they have to have a GPS in their scooter. How's the guy going to manage all this? And this is not a high paying job, it's a pizza delivery guy. So if you don't have skills, these guys are coming out of these schools without the ability to read and write. They are just a pair of hands. They are angry with the system, and rightly so, and they are well represented by people like Mr. Rai, because they have nobody's given them a step up in life. So the first thing you do is you give tax breaks to employers who skill their labor. National Skills Development Corporation is doing a very good job, but they're approaching the problem from a way of trying to skill sections of the workforce in industries where labor is needed. Let's say retail workers, catering workers, people like that. But essentially, until we recognize the fact that 90% of India's labor is not represented by the laws only represent the Brahmanical labor force of the country. The other castes in labor are not represented. Until we do that, all of this is tinkering.